Have you ever done something for a stranger, expecting nothing in return, only to discover your simple act of kindness would change your life forever? Picture a small auto shop on the outskirts of town, a struggling mechanic with grease under his fingernails and worry lines etched deep around his eyes. Enter a young woman, broke and desperate. Her car gasping its final breath by the roadside. The mechanic patches her vehicle for free, believing in nothing more than old-fashioned compassion. Hours later, a parade of luxury cars rolls into his shop unannounced, transforming his world in ways he never dreamed possible. Thomas Wilcox woke before sunrise as he did every day. His tiny rented room, more of a closet really, was illuminated by a single threadbare lamp that flickered each time the refrigerator kicked on in the other room. On the narrow bed, the sheets had gone threadbare for constant washing. But Thomas was used to it. Long ago he had grown accustomed to living in survival mode. He sighed as he pulled on his oil-stained jeans and rummaged for a clean shirt, eventually deciding on one that was only half covered in old grease. The car horns from the next street over had started by 6 in the morning, reminding him that another day of toiling in the pit of his modest auto shop lay ahead. The shop wasn't truly his. He had a handshake agreement with the real owner, a retiree named Mr. Mendoza, to run it at a discount rent in exchange for bringing in customers. But business was slow, especially in the last few months, and Thomas could feel the strain. Just 3 years ago, he'd been proud to hand over his life savings as a partial down payment for a stake in the shop. His dream was to own it outright one day and name it Wilcox & Sons, even though he had no children, just a faint hope for the future. Now, with the economy struggling and competition from franchise repair centers, he was barely managing to keep the doors open. He locked the door of his cramped studio apartment and descended the rickety metal steps into the alley, hearing a muttered greeting from his neighbor Cynthia, who was busy sweeping the shared walkway. With a nod, he headed to the bus stop because his old pickup was out of commission. He had poured all his extra cash into paying off the shop's rent arrears instead of fixing his own vehicle. On the bus ride, Thomas stared out the window, remembering how his parents used to drive him around in their beat-up station wagon when he was a kid in Grants Pass, Oregon. Those days felt simpler. Packed lunches, hikes in the local forest, a father who knew how to fix every rickety fence on the property, and a mother who believed in small acts of kindness. That was where his love for tinkering began, in a garage that smelled of sawdust and engine oil. Now, at 35, with lines beginning to furrow his brow, he was still chasing that dream of working with his hands. Only reality was far more grueling than childhood fantasy. Once the bus jerked to a stop near the auto shop, Thomas hopped off. Wilcox & Mendoza Auto Repair was painted in faded letters on the sign that hung above a large rolling garage door. He noticed with dismay another letter from the utility company, half tucked under the door. His heart sank a bit further. He knew he had to pay the electricity bill or risk losing the meager lighting and the ability to run diagnostic tools. But he had barely enough to cover the essential overhead this month. He stepped inside, flipping the main breaker on, and listening to the overhead fluorescents flicker to life. In that moment, he whispered a small prayer of gratitude, at least for another day, of being able to do the only thing he truly loved, fixing cars, giving them new life, and helping people get on the road again. Even if he was drowning in bills, he could still hold on to that small slice of purpose. Around mid-morning, Thomas found himself elbow-deep in the engine of a battered Toyota Camry that belonged to Mary O'Connell, a retired teacher who, like him, struggled to make ends meet. She often paid him in homemade pies and small installments over time. He didn't mind, because Mary had a heart of gold, and her gratitude warmed him more than money ever could. As he worked, he heard the hesitant rumble of another car pulling up. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Outside, a woman stepped out of a very old Honda Civic with a missing hubcap and taped-up side mirror. She looked exhausted. Thomas could see the strain etched on her face, her shoulders sagging as though she carried the weight of the world. Her clothes were neat, but worn, her purse frayed at the edges. "Excuse me," she called timidly. "Is this Wilcox and Mendoza Auto Repair?" Thomas pulled off his gloves and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. That's us. I'm Thomas Wilcox. How can I help you?" The woman sighed with relief. "I'm Vanessa Green. My car is... well, it's on its last legs. I'm not sure what's wrong, but it's making this awful clunking sound every time I brake." She took a few steps closer and lowered her voice. "I was recommended by Susan Riley from the church a few blocks away. She said you sometimes help out people who are in a bind." Thomas felt a twinge of both pride and embarrassment. He prided himself on doing the right thing, but he also hated that his shop's financial woes were well known. He cleared his throat. "Sure, let's take a look. Pull it into the bay." Vanessa attempted to start the car again, only to have it sputter as if refusing to obey. With a grimace, she managed to coax it forward, where it lurched before stalling completely. Thomas waved her out of the vehicle and guided it into place using the shop's manual push dolly. Once inside, he popped the hood. At first glance, the engine was caked in grime. Belts were frayed, and the brake lines looked dangerously worn. He shot her a concerned look. "I'm going to do a quick check, but I can already tell there's a lot going on here. When's the last time it was serviced?" Vanessa's voice trembled. I honestly can't remember. It's been years since I could afford more than just an oil change. I need to keep this car running or I won't be able to get to my new job downtown. Please, I just started and..." She hesitated, swallowing back tears. "I just don't have the money right now." Thomas could feel her desperation. He grabbed a rag and rubbed his hands nervously. Over the years, he'd seen the same fear in many people, fear of not being able to pay for repairs, fear of losing their only transportation to a job that could keep food on the table. And he remembered all too well what it felt like to be in that position. Actually, he was still in that position, just on the other side of the counter. "It's okay," he said gently. "We'll figure something out. Let me just see how bad it is. I'll give you an estimate, and we'll go from there." Vanessa nodded, trying to smile. "Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. I really appreciate it." As he fiddled with the engine, hooking up a diagnostic reader, he asked casually, "So Susan from the church recommended me, huh?" Vanessa nodded again. "Yes. I volunteer sometimes, helping serve meals on the weekends. She said you fixed her nephew's truck once for next to nothing. She thought you might be able to do the same for me." Thomas exhaled. In truth, his finances were in shambles. A day of labor on a car that might not pay would only set him back further. But he couldn't turn her away. Something about her vulnerability sparked a memory of the day his father rescued a stranded driver on a lonely highway. No questions asked, no payment required. It was the Wilcox way. Quietly, he said, "Let me see what I can do." Thomas spent the better part of the afternoon diagnosing the Honda. Each new revelation felt like a gut punch. The brake pads were almost gone. The rotors were worn, and a small leak in the radiator spelled trouble down the line. Fixing all these issues would cost more than Vanessa could likely handle. He broke the news gently, but it was clear from the tremble in her voice that the cost was out of reach. Standing beside the open hood, she wrung her hands, eyes darting around the shop as though searching for answers. "I can't even afford half of that right now," she admitted. "I get paid in 2 weeks, but until then, I don't know what to do." Her face fell. "I'm so sorry." Thomas had a choice. Do what he usually did, arrange a payment plan, or decline the job entirely, or follow the generosity his father taught him and fix the car so that Vanessa could keep her life on track. He remembered the times in his own life when a small kindness made all the difference when he was too broke to eat and someone offered him a hot meal. Now, standing in the comfort of his own shop, as humble as it was, he knew he couldn't turn her away. "All right," he said. Finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll fix it up." Vanessa blinked in disbelief. "But I don't have any money to pay you right now." Thomas forced a shrug and forced a smile that he hoped concealed his own growing anxieties. "We'll figure it out down the line. Maybe you can pay me in installments or bring me lunch sometimes." He laughed a little, trying to lighten the mood. Her eyes brimmed with tears, part relief, part overwhelming gratitude. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I'll pay you back. I'm not the type to." He held up his hand. "No need for promises. Just do right by others when you can." Thomas motioned her over to the small waiting area, which was basically a couple of chairs near the front of the shop. "You can hang around if you want, though it might take me a few hours." Vanessa shook her head. "I'm actually supposed to be at my job in an hour. I can't be late. It's my 3rd day," she gave him a pleading look. "Is there a bus stop nearby, 2 blocks south? You'll see a bus route, but you'll have to hustle." Without another word, she sprinted off, pausing once at the door to toss him the keys. "Thank you so much, Mr. Wilcox," she called breathlessly. "I won't forget this." Then she was gone, leaving Thomas alone with the battered Honda. He sighed, looking around at a shop that had more overhead than profits. He glanced at the letters piling up in the corner of his desk. Each notice a stern reminder that he was behind on everything. Rent electric parts, supplier bills. Still, he felt a kind of warmth surge through him. He was doing something right. He spent the rest of the day and well into the evening working on Vanessa's car. After rummaging through the old storage bins, he managed to find some used brake pads that were still in decent condition. He'd have to order new rotors, but he had a friend in a salvage yard who sometimes gave him a decent discount. He replaced hoses, did a partial fix on the radiator leak, and patched up the worst of the issues. By the time he was done, his hands trembled from exhaustion, and the overhead lights buzzed ominously. Yet as he lowered the car back down, he felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. When Vanessa came back, hopefully tomorrow, she'd have a safe set of wheels to get to her job. That might be the difference between her keeping or losing that job. Thomas thought of the old saying, "You can't get a job without a car, and you can't get a car without a job." He patted the Honda's hood with something close to affection. "Hang in there," he muttered. "Both of us need a break." The next day dawned with a blistering heat wave that threatened to push everyone's tempers to the brink. Thomas arrived early at the shop, sweaty and out of breath from running to catch the bus. A part of him hoped that he might see Vanessa return soon, just so he could let her know the car was ready to go. The morning was punctuated by a few regular customers. Mary O'Connell stopped by to thank Thomas with a fresh pecan pie. Then Mr. Davenport, the mailman, who delivered letters in the neighborhood, swung in for a quick oil change. All the while, Thomas kept glancing at the door, waiting for Vanessa. She didn't show. Afternoon turned to late evening. Thomas locked up, disappointed she hadn't come to retrieve her car, but also slightly worried. He rummaged in his pocket for the slip of paper with her phone number. She'd scrawled it hastily on the back of an envelope, but he discovered with dismay that the slip was smudged. The last few digits were illegible. Great, he muttered, anxiety creeping in. Now I have no way to contact her. The next morning, the same pattern repeated. But by noon, a silent tension had settled over Thomas. He didn't know where Vanessa was or why she hadn't come for the car. It felt strange considering how desperate she had been. Did something happen to her? Was she in trouble, or had she simply decided to vanish and leave him with the repair bill? He was frowning over these questions when a sleek black Mercedes S-Class pulled into his dusty lot. The car's windows were tinted, and the reflection from the sun glinted off its polished exterior, making it stand out like a diamond among pebbles. Thomas's heart gave a quick lurch. Wealthy clients were scarce around here. If they came, they usually belonged to the fancy dealership mechanics, not a run-down garage like his. From the driver's seat emerged a man in a crisp suit, holding a phone to his ear. Behind the Mercedes, another luxury car, a bright red BMW M8, parked smoothly, followed by yet another, a silver Range Rover. Thomas counted quickly 3 luxury cars, all pulling up in tandem. The man in the suit ended his call and walked over to Thomas, eyeing the shop's facade. "Are you Thomas Wilcox?" he asked curtly. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag. Yes. Can I help you?" The man removed a pair of designer sunglasses. "Mr. Wilcox, my name is Mark Peterson. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Green." Thomas's eyes widened. Ms. Green. Vanessa. Was she in trouble? This man looked like an attorney or personal assistant, someone who had a lot more money than sense in these parts. Before Thomas could respond, the doors to the other cars opened, and more people stepped out. A petite woman in a stylish blouse, wearing diamond-studded earrings. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a polo shirt with a gold watch flashing on his wrist, and a few others who looked equally out of place in the dusty lot. They glanced around with mild discomfort, as if they couldn't believe they were standing in a modest auto shop off a cracked asphalt road. "Ms. Green asked that we deliver some items to you," Mark Peterson continued. "She also asked me to handle any outstanding financial arrangements." Thomas stood there speechless as Mark reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a long white envelope. Inside, Thomas glimpsed what looked suspiciously like a cashier's check, his name neatly printed on the payee line. "I'm not sure I understand," Thomas stammered. "Is Vanessa all right?" One of the women, elegant mid-40s with the posture of someone accustomed to fine living, stepped forward. "She's more than all right. She told us what you did, Mr. Wilcox. We're here to make sure you're compensated." And then some. Thomas felt the world tilt on its axis. A check. Luxury cars. Compensation. It made no sense. The fancy woman offered him a polite smile. "Vanessa told us how you repaired her car without charging. She told us the circumstances and how you refused to let her pay at the time. Well, she's a dear friend, though you might not have realized that from her appearance." Mark Peterson glanced at Thomas's reaction with mild amusement. "Ms. Green is in the philanthropic circle with some very influential people. Today we'd like to make sure your generosity doesn't go unrewarded." Thomas's mind spun. He recalled how Vanessa seemed so broke, so distraught. A philanthropic circle. Influential people. Could it be that she'd been testing him? Or was there some other explanation? The tall man with the gold watch chimed in. "Vanessa didn't tell you who she was, did she?" He chuckled. "Classic Ms. Green. She's the niece of Wesley Green, founder of Green Tech Innovations. Perhaps you've heard of it." Thomas's breath caught. Green Tech was one of the largest renewable energy companies on the West Coast. He had read an article about Wesley Green in Forbes. I had no idea." "She's far from broke," the woman said gently. But she was in a difficult personal situation, some conflict with her family over how she chooses to do philanthropy. She decided to prove a point by living a more humble life for a while, see how the other half lives, you might say. That's how she ended up with that old Honda. And that's how she met you. Thomas reeled. So that's why she looked so desperate. She was truly on her own, for the time being reliant on that battered car and a brand new job. She wasn't lying about needing help. She just hadn't explained the bigger picture. "We're all here today," Mark Peterson said, "because Vanessa wanted to show you her gratitude. She said you went above and beyond when you had every reason not to. This is a demonstration that kindness is never wasted." Thomas was so stunned that he couldn't form a coherent response. His tired eyes flicked from the envelope to the Mercedes, then to the group of well-dressed individuals crowding his humble parking lot. In the back of his mind, he wondered if he was dreaming. "So what exactly did Vanessa want you to bring me?" he finally asked. Mark Peterson handed him the envelope. "In here you'll find a cashier's check for your immediate debts. Vanessa did a little digging and discovered you were behind on rent and utility bills. She would like to rectify that situation so you can continue helping people in need without jeopardizing your livelihood." Thomas's hands shook as he opened the envelope. The number on the check was staggering enough to not only cover back rent and bills, but to make a major dent in the cost of new equipment or expansions. Also, the elegant woman added, "We'd like to arrange for a complete upgrade of your garage. Vanessa wants you to have the best tools and technology so you can expand your business. It seems you have a heart for helping people. With better equipment, you can do that more efficiently." Thomas felt his throat constrict. Tears threatened to blur his vision. I don't even know what to say." Mark Peterson offered a faint smile. "Sometimes a simple thank you is enough. But if you really want to show gratitude, keep doing what you do. Keep helping people who can't afford those big dealership bills." Thomas looked at the ground, swallowing hard. "I've always believed in second chances for cars and people," he managed. This is overwhelming." The others nodded, each taking turns shaking his hand. "Vanessa will be here shortly," the woman said. "She told us to arrive first and let you know. She wanted to surprise you, I guess." Thomas attempted a laugh through his shock. She definitely succeeded. As if on cue, another vehicle, a sleek Lexus SUV, pulled into the lot. The door opened, and there stood Vanessa Green, no longer clad in worn clothing, but in a smart, casual dress, her hair neat, and a relieved smile tugging at her lips. "Surprise, Mr. Wilcox," she said softly, stepping forward. "I'm sorry if I shocked you with all of this, but you changed my life with your kindness. This is the least I can do." Thomas gazed at her in awe, uncertain whether to laugh, cry, or faint. You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," she replied, her voice trembling just enough to hint at her emotional state. "I told my Uncle Wesley about you. He insisted we fix up your garage, pay off your debts, and give you a real shot at success. You deserve it." Even as he tried to process her words, Thomas recalled the piles of overdue bills on his desk, the fear that had haunted him for months, the exhaustion that came from endless worry. All of it was about to vanish in a moment of breathtaking generosity. Vanessa stepped closer. "May I see the Honda? I never actually got to drive it, post-repair." Thomas blinked momentarily, forgetting about her battered car, which sat in the corner of the shop. "Of course, It's right this way." They walked together toward the bay. The others followed at a respectful distance, letting Vanessa have this moment with Thomas. When they reached the car, Vanessa ran a hand along its side. "Wow, you really fixed her up. She's running great." Thomas nodded, his professional pride kicking in. "Yeah, it took some creativity, but I got it functional. It won't last forever, not with this many miles, but it'll get you from point A to point B safely now." Vanessa glanced over her shoulder at the Lexus. "I might keep driving this old thing for a bit longer, just to remind me of what's important," she joked softly, though Thomas could hear the sincerity in her voice. Then she turned to face him fully, eyes glimmering. "Thomas, I can't thank you enough. You were willing to help when I was at rock bottom financially, emotionally, and you never once made me feel ashamed. You treated me with kindness and respect. That's so rare." Thomas shrugged, blinking away tears. "I just did what anyone decent would do." Vanessa smiled, a tear escaping down her cheek. "Not everyone does it, trust me. That's why you're special. That's why I had to do something special for you." She embraced him briefly, a gesture of heartfelt gratitude. Thomas, stunned, managed to pat her gently on the back. Over her shoulder he saw the small crowd from the luxury cars looking on with approval. Now Vanessa whispered, stepping back and playfully adjusting the collar of his grease-stained shirt. "Let's get your shop turned into the success it deserves to be." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity that left Thomas questioning if he was living a dream. True to their word, Vanessa and her influential friends paid off. His back rent cleared the utility bills and set up a trust to cover immediate and future renovations. A local contracting company, paid for by Vanessa, descended on the shop, installing new lifts, updated diagnostic computers, and a fresh coat of paint on every surface. The battered sign was replaced by a sleek, modern one, Wilcox Auto Repair, at Vanessa's gentle insistence that Thomas should have top billing. Mr. Mendoza happily agreed, more than willing to see the shop's future guaranteed. He even offered to formally transfer ownership to Thomas, seeing that the younger man had proven his integrity and skill. Every day, Thomas awoke expecting the bubble to burst. Yet each day, he found the transformation more real and more promising. With the improved equipment, he could handle more clients, more complicated repairs, and deliver top-notch service in half the time. Word spread quickly around town that something miraculous was happening at Wilcox Auto Repair. Locals who once dismissed the little garage began to queue up for appointments, lured by the glowing reviews and the curiosity about how a struggling shop had suddenly become state-of-the-art. Vanessa visited often, usually with Mark Peterson in tow, to handle business matters. Sometimes she'd roll up in the old Honda, which she insisted on keeping for sentimental reasons, though it now sported a brand-new radiator and a thorough tune-up. Other times, she'd arrive in one of her more luxurious vehicles, especially on days she had charity events to attend. But she remained approachable, warm and down-to-earth. She'd chat with the staff, bring lunch for the workers, and lend a hand wherever she could. During one of her visits, Thomas found himself alone with her in the office going over invoices. The new digital system installed by her team was user-friendly, but it was still a step up from the paper receipts he'd used for years. As she guided him through the software, he couldn't help but notice how her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear when she was focusing. She too seemed to study him more closely. In one tender moment, Vanessa's hand lingered on his arm as she pointed at the screen. Their eyes met just a second too long to be casual. Heat flared in Thomas's cheeks, and he quickly glanced away. A swirl of unexpected feelings roiled in his chest. Gratefulness, attraction, admiration. But was it appropriate? She was wealthy, powerful, and only in town sporadically. He was a mechanic whose fortunes had just turned thanks entirely to her generosity. Could there be room in her life for a simple man like him? He tried to bury those thoughts, focusing instead on how to manage the influx of new clients. Still, the question lingered. Late one afternoon, as the last rays of sun spilled across the freshly painted walls of Wilcox Auto Repair, Thomas found Vanessa standing near the front counter, unusually still. Her phone was pressed tightly in her hand, knuckles, white eyes unfocused. She was staring at the floor like it had delivered bad news. He'd seen her like this only once before, on the day she'd first walked into his garage, desperate and overwhelmed. Now, despite the neat blouse and calm exterior, something inside her was clearly unraveling. "Vanessa," he asked softly, wiping his hands on a shop towel as he approached. "Everything okay?" She blinked slowly, as if surfacing from deep water, and offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just got off the phone with my uncle, Wesley." Thomas gave a slight nod. He knew that name. Wesley Green, founder and CEO of Green Tech Innovations, billionaire entrepreneur, her guardian and mentor, and from what Thomas had gathered, the closest thing to a father figure she had left. "He wants me to come back," she said, her voice distant. "Says it's time I stop playing around with small-town charity and start taking my place on the Green Tech board again." Thomas tilted his head. "Is that what he really said?" "Pretty much," she replied. He dressed it up in corporate speak, but the message was clear enough with the emotional side projects. "Time to suit up." She walked over to the window, staring out at the dusty lot beyond, where a couple of kids rode by on bikes, laughing and carefree. "I left that world for a reason, Thomas. I wanted to see real impact on the ground with real people, not behind glass walls in a boardroom." Thomas leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Can't you do both?" Vanessa turned to him, her eyes glinting with frustration. "That's what I told him, that I could balance both, that what I'm doing here matters too. But he doesn't see it that way. To him, the only impact worth measuring is tied to profit margins and quarterly reports." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then spoke gently. "And what do you think?" She hesitated. "I think I'm scared. Scared that if I go back, I'll lose myself in that machine again. That I'll become another polished, smiling executive, nodding through board meetings while forgetting what it's like to change someone's life with a single decision." Thomas understood that fear all too well. He'd spent years grinding under the weight of expectations, keeping the shop running, keeping himself afloat, never daring to imagine a life beyond that. "You didn't lose yourself when you came here," he said. "You found something real. And I think your uncle knows it too. That's why he's pushing so hard. He sees your independence and it scares him. You're not just his niece anymore. You're your own force." Vanessa's eyes softened, gratitude creeping into her expression. "You always say exactly what I need to hear." "It's a gift," he teased, flashing a crooked grin. That coaxed a laugh from her. The tension between them eased just a bit. A beat passed, and then Vanessa took a breath, stepping closer. "You know, I never thought I'd find this kind of connection here. With this place. With you." Thomas's heart thudded a little faster. "I came to this town just trying to prove something to myself," she continued. "I wanted to know I could survive without wealth, without privilege. But I never expected to fall in love with the community, with the people." She stopped herself and gave a small smile with the work. There was more she wanted to say. He could see it. But for now, she let it hang there. "Well, the work loves you back," Thomas said, gesturing around the shop. "So do the people." They stood there in silence, the kind that didn't demand words. The truth was, over the past few months, their bond had grown into something steady and intimate. It was no longer just about business or gratitude. They had fallen into a rhythm, shared coffees in the early morning, before the first job quick jokes between customers, quiet evenings, spent going over invoices or talking about life. There was something about Vanessa that calmed the storm in Thomas. Her presence steadied him, and he liked to think that he grounded her too, that he reminded her what mattered beneath the noise of wealth and legacy. That evening, after the mechanics had gone home and the shop had quieted down, Thomas found her sitting in the newly renovated customer lounge, curled up on the worn leather couch she insisted they keep for charm. She was scrolling through something on her tablet, but her eyes were unfocused again. "Still thinking about that call?" he asked, settling in across from her. She nodded. "He offered me an executive seat, Thomas, a 7-figure salary, full oversight of Green Tech's environmental initiative." He raised his eyebrows. "That's a lot." Vanessa chuckled dryly. "It is. And it's tempting. Not just the money, though. Yeah, that's nice. It's the scale, the chance to do massive projects, fund new tech, change entire regions." But he prompted gently. "But I don't want to trade scale for soul," she said. "Here I know every name, every face. I see the results. The mom driving her kids to school again. The grandfather whose old truck finally runs without stalling. That's real. That's impact, too." Thomas nodded, deeply moved. "Then stay. Find your balance. Create your own blueprint for how change can work, big and small." She studied him for a long time, her gaze filled with something raw and honest. "Would you be okay with that? Me staying?" He smiled slowly. "I'd be more than okay with that." A silence followed, full, warm and stretching between them like a bridge. And then in a moment of quiet vulnerability, Vanessa reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't have to. That night, as the shop lights dimmed and the stars blinked to life overhead, something unspoken blossomed between them. It wasn't just respect, or friendship, or admiration. It was something deeper, a quiet, growing love shaped not by grand gestures or glamorous settings, but by grease-streaked hands, early morning coffees, and shared dreams. And for both of them, that was more than enough. The summer air hung heavy and warm as Thomas flipped the closed sign on the shop's front door and locked up for the night. A soft hum of cicadas echoed across the quiet street, and the orange-pink hues of the setting sun bled across the horizon. He wiped his hands on a rag worn with oil and memory, then turned to see Vanessa still sitting inside at the front counter, her eyes focused on a spreadsheet glowing on the newly installed computer monitor. She looked peaceful, focused, and to Thomas, beautiful in that unassuming, deeply human way that had crept into his heart when he wasn't looking. "Still working?" he asked, stepping back in his boots, echoing faintly on the concrete floor. Vanessa looked up and smiled. "I'm just tweaking some of the service pricing. I noticed we've been undercharging for diagnostics again." Thomas chuckled, stepping behind the counter beside her. "You caught that, huh?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're kind, Thomas, but kindness doesn't keep the lights on." "Tell that to the electric company," he replied with a smirk. Vanessa laughed softly. "Well, I just did. I paid your utility bill this morning." He blinked. "Vanessa." "I told you I know," she interrupted, gently closing the laptop. "But I also know you'd never ask for help, even when you need it. So let me do this. For you. For us." That last word hung in the air, heavier than any invoice or service quote. Us. They hadn't really defined what they were not out loud. The long looks, the occasional brush of hands, the nights working late and laughing over cold sandwiches, those moments had said plenty. But neither of them had dared to label it, until now. Thomas watched her as she stood and gathered her things, then joined him outside under the fading sky. The street lamp buzzed to life above them, casting a pale halo around her figure as she adjusted her scarf against the cooling breeze. "You're working too hard," he said softly, stepping closer. "You should be at some rooftop gala in New York right now, sipping champagne and talking policy." Vanessa's smile dimmed, replaced by something thoughtful. "I've been to enough of those to last me a lifetime. This," she gestured toward the humble garage, the cracked sidewalk, the battered pickup truck parked at the curb. "This is where I feel most alive, most useful." Thomas looked away, his gaze traveling to the lot. "You've done more for this place than I ever could have asked for. But sometimes I wonder what she asked, facing him fully. "If I'm enough for you," he admitted, voice low. "You come from a world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. I'm just a mechanic with a newly repaired shop and an apartment that still smells faintly like WD-40. Vanessa stepped closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "Don't say, 'just a mechanic,' like it's a bad thing. You fixed more than my car that day. Thomas, you fixed a piece of me that had forgotten how real kindness feels. I've met CEOs, celebrities, people with endless money, and not one of them made me feel as safe, as seen as you did that afternoon." He swallowed hard, her words hitting deeper than he'd expected. "I've tried not to fall for you," he said after a moment. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think I could keep up. You deserve more." Vanessa's eyes shimmered. "Thomas Wilcox, you are more. You're everything I didn't know I needed." A long silence passed between them, warm and electric. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and a car engine coughed to life, but in that moment, it was just the two of them. Then Vanessa exhaled shakily and said, "There's something I've been wanting to say for a while." Thomas turned to face her completely, his chest tightening. She looked up at him, her voice trembling just enough to be real. "I have feelings for you, and it's not just gratitude. It's not just respect. It's something deeper. I think I'm falling in love with you." The air around them seemed to still, For a heartbeat, Thomas couldn't find words, couldn't move. His entire world tilted. "You really?" He finally managed his voice hoarse. She nodded, biting her lip as if bracing for rejection. "I wasn't sure if I should say it. I didn't want to complicate what we have or make it harder for you." "Harder," he whispered. "Vanessa, you've made everything easier. Lighter. You brought hope back into this place, into me." Then, before either could hesitate further, he reached out and cupped her cheek in his hand. Her skin was warm beneath his calloused palm. They stood under the buzz of the street lamp, his heart pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. "I've fallen too," he said simply. "Harder than I ever thought possible." And with that, he leaned in. Their lips met gently, not rushed or dramatic, but with the quiet tenderness of two people who had already found something rare in each other, a promise made without words. When they finally broke apart, Vanessa smiled through the tears in her eyes. "So, what now?" Thomas let out a breathless laugh. "Well, I suppose now I walk you home, and tomorrow we open the shop like nothing happened while secretly smiling every 5 minutes. Vanessa laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "That sounds perfect." They began walking slowly down the sidewalk, hand in hand, their steps synchronized. The night air carried a hint of jasmine, and the town around them glowed gently under the canopy of stars. Neither spoke, because in that moment words would have only interrupted something pure. At the curb, Vanessa turned to him once more. "Thank you, Thomas, not just for the car, for everything." He squeezed her hand. "No. Thank you for trusting me with more than just your engine." They stood in silence a moment longer, soaking in the wonder of it all. Then they parted ways for the night, but not as business partners or acquaintances, or two people bound by circumstance. Now they were something else, something real, and the next chapter of their lives was just waiting to begin. As summer melted into the golden hues of autumn, the transformation of Wilcox Auto Repair was nothing short of breathtaking. The once faded shop now gleamed with fresh paint, upgraded tools, and the energy of possibility humming in every corner. New signage bearing the bold name Wilcox Auto Repair sparkled against the backdrop of a crisp blue sky, a quiet testament to everything Thomas had fought for and everything Vanessa had made possible. But the biggest change wasn't just in the building. It was in Thomas himself. He walked differently now, shoulders more squared, his gaze more assured. There was still humility in his voice, still grease under his fingernails, but something deeper had settled inside him. Purpose, confidence, hope. Business was booming. Word had spread like wildfire through the community, thanks to a heartfelt article in the local paper titled "Mechanics' Kindness Sparks a Community Revival." The piece chronicled how Thomas had repaired Vanessa Green's car, free of charge, and how that one choice brought unexpected blessings to his life. That article became a catalyst. People from nearby towns came not just for oil changes or brake work, but for the story. For a piece of the honesty they sensed behind Wilcox Auto Repair. Inspired by the attention, Thomas, with Vanessa's enthusiastic support, launched a Sunday outreach program, free oil changes for single moms, and discounted tire checks for seniors. The waiting area buzzed with conversation, and often Vanessa herself would roll up her sleeves to pass out coffee or chat with customers about their lives, treating them like neighbors, not clients. She had woven herself into the fabric of the business seamlessly. Thomas found himself marveling at her more often. Whether she was kneeling to help a child out of a booster seat while their mother waited for a repair, or negotiating a bulk discount with parts suppliers over the phone, Vanessa radiated warmth and competence. She wasn't just a benefactor, she was a partner in every way that mattered. And yet she still split her time between their town and her more formal obligations. She flew to Los Angeles for charity galas. She consulted with her Uncle Wesley on Green Tech's environmental strategy. Sometimes she'd send Thomas photos from whatever city she was in, usually of a car she saw that reminded her of one in the shop or a quirky auto museum. And always she'd sign off with, "Can't wait to be back." At first, Thomas kept their relationship private. He wasn't sure what people would say about the mechanic and the heiress. But Vanessa was never one to hide. One Friday morning, she arrived at the shop with cinnamon rolls from a bakery 2 towns over. She kissed Thomas on the cheek in plain view of the crew. The mechanics grinned. Mary O'Connell, who had brought a pumpkin pie that day, winked and said, "About time." From then on, it was no secret. Their connection was undeniable. Evenings became their time. After the shop closed, they'd cook simple meals together. Thomas trying, failing, and eventually perfecting her favorite chicken marsala. They took walks through the tree-lined parks, her hand always tucked in his. They sat on the back steps of his apartment building, watching stars blink into view as the city settled into silence. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked one night, gazing up at the sky. The big city buzz, the private jets, the luxury. Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes. But this," she gestured around them, "feels more real, more fulfilling." She paused. "My life before this was curated Thomas. Press releases, public appearances, donations through foundations. But helping you, being here, that was real impact. It made me realize I want to live closer to the people I'm trying to help." Thomas didn't say anything at first. He just held her closer. A few weeks later, at Vanessa's gentle urging, Thomas finally upgraded his apartment. It was still modest, but no longer bare. A second-hand couch replaced the threadbare one. New curtains framed the windows. He even let Vanessa paint the walls a soft shade of slate blue. It wasn't about luxury. It was about allowing space for the life they were building together. In the shop, business continued to evolve. Thomas hired a second full-time mechanic and a teenage apprentice named Leo, who reminded him of himself at 16, eager, scrappy, and fascinated by carburetors. Vanessa started a small scholarship fund for local high schoolers interested in vocational training, naming it Quietly in honor of Thomas's late mother. They hosted a grand reopening event in early October. Balloons and music barbecue for the guests and discounted services for anyone who walked through the door. Families came in droves. The mayor made a brief speech presenting Thomas with a certificate of recognition for his contributions to the community. Thomas stood beside Vanessa, his hand wrapped in hers, the applause washing over them like a wave. That night, after everyone had gone home, Thomas and Vanessa stood in the center of the shop, quiet and exhausted. "Did you ever think it had come to this?" she asked, eyes reflecting the strings of lights, still hanging from the rafters. He looked around at the place that had once barely kept the lights on. "Not in a million years." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you, of everything you've built." Thomas shook his head. "We built it, together." Then from his back pocket, he pulled out a small envelope. "I wasn't sure when the right time would be. But tonight Feels right. Vanessa blinked. What's this? He handed it to her. Inside was a key, simple, unadorned, slightly worn. It's to my apartment, he said. Or maybe our apartment if you'd like it to be. Her eyes welled instantly. Are you serious? He nodded. It's not much, but it's home. And if you want, I want you there. Not just for sleepovers or morning coffee, I mean, really there. Vanessa threw her arms around him, key clutched tightly in her hand. I'd love that. They stood there for a long moment, hearts aligned in the stillness of the shop that had witnessed the beginning of everything. The next morning, a familiar sight greeted them at sunrise, a queue of cars already forming in the lot. Some were old beaters, others were shiny hybrids, a few were family vans, and one was a delivery truck. Each driver came seeking repairs. But they would leave with more than that. They'd leave knowing kindness lived here, and that it all started with one mechanic, one woman in need, and a choice to help expecting nothing in return. Thomas Wilcox, once on the brink of losing everything, now stood not just as a business owner, but as a beacon. And Vanessa, once disguised in desperation, now stood beside him, no longer a mystery, no longer just a client, but home. So ends the incredible journey of Thomas Wilcox, a modest mechanic whose single act of kindness transformed not only his life, but also an entire community. From a ramshackle auto shop on the verge of closing to a thriving center of repair and goodwill, Thomas's selfless choice to help Vanessa Green when she was in need showed the power of compassion. In turn, Vanessa repaid him with opportunity, love, and renewed hope. Their story reminds us that real change often begins with a single spark of kindness, and that spark can kindle a flame that lights the way for many. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in the power of generosity, resilience, and second chances, please give this video a like, share it with friends who need a bit of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales. Your support means everything. Thank you for watching.